And in the Sudan situation for the ICC, I'm now representing victims, but victims not of the case against Bashir, the president, but victims in the case against the rebels in part of Darfur. And it's quite interesting to see how difficult it is for the courts to manage representation of the interests of victims. They also had trouble in Cambodia as well, trying to work out systems. Because if you allow, first of all, I think the courts are all enthusiastic about letting victims take a part, being represented, having a say, and maybe being compensated. And making it part of the same trial, as sometimes happens in civil system cases in any event. The problem is, I think, one of management, because if you have even 10 victims and they're allowed to participate individually, they will certainly stretch the trial really beyond an acceptable period of time. If you say to 10 victims, but there could be not just 10, but 100 or 1,000, you say, sorry, you're all going to be represented by this one person, then you may be asking an impossible compromise of one victim and another. So that at the moment, you'll find, if you look around, particularly in the ICC, that the judges are having, first of all, they are enthusiastic, and secondly, they're simply at the very beginning of the road along which they will have to pass before they can achieve satisfactory modalities for this part of the trial. From my point of view, I think it's a very good thing. I think that one of the problems both of national and international trials is that the victims, the problem about reconciliation is in part a problem that the victims don't feel that they are participants in the trial. They feel they're left out. And if you bring them in, it's harder for that to happen, and maybe reconciliation will be more realistically an objective of these trials.
I was just curious about your point of lawyers in these positions not having the experience in a conflict. But on the other side of that, would there be fair processes happening for the, say, bigger fish in Rwanda or in the region here? Is there, or even for maybe a head of state or government that comes from a more pronounced society, it's not the right word, but from, say, a Security Council permanent member state. What, in your opinion, would be a better process for some of these types of trials on war crimes and crimes against humanity? Or is there a proper solution to go after heads of government or heads of state that, because there may be less documents going, maybe less documents that point to them. Is that a good idea to go after them? You know, do you think there are people protecting them? I guess there's many parts to this.
There's a number of questions wound up in there, and I'll try and answer two of them.
Okay.
As to the first point, it may well be, despite I said I don't know what people in the future will think about trial by foreigner, but it may actually be there is no present alternative. But of course, the instinctive distrust of trial by foreigner is one of the driving forces that says as soon as you can get trials back to be tried in the relevant national territory, the better. And I don't think there's really very much disagreement about that. It's only a question of how soon you can get it back and what you can do to help it. Coming to your last point, and it enables me to focus on another bit of evidence. How do you try leaders? The best bit of evidence we called, not my idea, somebody else's idea. The best bit of evidence we called in the Yugoslavian case, in some ways, was the evidence of a very moderately expressed expert from the Holocaust Center in Amsterdam, who explained in a report how it is that mass crimes committed at the level of the ordinary citizen, the neighbour, are in fact controlled from the top, even though you can't see the puppet strings. And the evidence he gave was, in general terms, he said not one word about the former Yugoslavia in his report or in his evidence to me. Milosevic asked him a few questions about the former Yugoslavia, but he didn't. His evidence was just the mechanics of how it happens, invisible though it may be. And one of the interpreters who was in one of the interpretation booths, and they're frequently both the most knowledgeable, most intelligent, best read people in the courtroom, far out gunning the lawyers often enough, and the judges, saw me afterwards and said, that was the best piece of evidence you gave, because without saying it, you could read across what are the standard features that you can pick up from, and I think that the expert relied on Nazi Germany, Cambodia, Armenia, and Rwanda, I think. You can pick up the generality and you can say, yes, of course, that happened in this case. And therefore, the leader was responsible for what was done by those below him. And one of the important issues that would have arisen in the Milosevic case is not just that process, but the mechanics of control invisibly, but that leaders these days must be assumed to know, and indeed must know, that if you do this, this, and this, people will respond to it in this way, by killing their neighbours, by taking their wives, their cars, their cattle. And you must know that by doing this, by using propaganda, by a certain amount of state violence, by fostering in and out culture, them and us culture, you create this and you are responsible for it. So thank you for giving me the chance to mention that. I mentioned it earlier.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yes. Yeah. May I ask you to dare an assessment of what is the role of the ICTY in writing the history of the fall of Yugoslavia? I understand that it might be too early to say, but I'm intrigued by your, if I understand it correctly, by your argument that there are political and publicist considerations that interfere strongly in these trials. And at the same time, you think that the value of these trials will be that they'll leave a better record of what happened. So if you...
Yeah, I mean, first of all, insofar as the Milosevic trial is concerned, whenever there was political pressure of which I was aware, I resisted it. It made for an extremely uncomfortable time, but I did resist it. And if I failed completely to resist it, then there would have had to be disclosure of what was relevant to the public in due course. So, for example, where we were within a few days of getting some telephone intercepts of conversations between Milosevic and Mladic at the time of Srebrenica, and we were blocked from doing so by an external force, thus to diminish the evidence available as against Milosevic, but also to reduce the evidence available showing the Western involvement or knowledge of or complicity in or whatever else it might be in what was happening, that would have had to be revealed. And to the extent that it's been possible to clarify these things afterwards by public lectures and so on, I've left those points uncovered. But so the rest of the evidence in the trial, my trial, and I'm sure in my colleagues' trials, was wherever possible, and I hope always in my trials, fairly presented and of course fully cross-examined and examined by the other parties to the trial. So that overall, I think very valuable records are left. And they're records that simply wouldn't have emerged at all otherwise. All these victims who gave evidence, who would otherwise never have given evidence. The experts who gave evidence, the politicians who came along and gave evidence against Milosevic, some of them having written books, some having not, and then finding themselves down. So I think that overall, the record will outweigh in its value the corruption of it by external forces. I've gone on too long.
I just want, if there are individuals who have questions, I think in light of time, I think Sir Geoffrey has given us a quite expansive and insightful and extraordinary insight into the trials that he was involved in at The Hague. And on behalf of the AUK summer program, I would just like to thank him for being with us this morning. I hope he might have a few minutes to answer individual questions. I also want to say that some of us had the unique experience in Bosnia and in Serbia to talk to victims of some of the atrocities, particularly in Srebrenica. And although it's taking somewhat the liberty to do that, on behalf of one of the mothers of Srebrenica, who shared with us her very moving personal story about losing 2 sons and her husband, she said, what we seek most of all is justice. And I just want to thank, on her behalf, take the liberty of thanking on her behalf, Sir Geoffrey, for his efforts, and thank him for being with us here this afternoon. Thank you.